I'm Jay with Automotive Lift Service. Our company has two storage lifts, the Advantage and the one that's here is the Backyard Buddy. They've both been out there so long that we're starting to have customers call and request instructions on how to rebuild their cylinders. So I'm going to attempt to pull the cylinder out of this Backyard Buddy, rebuild it, and reinstall it. The first thing I did is I raised the lift up to a comfortable height because the cylinder is underneath the runway with the power unit. I set it on the locks because the last thing you want to have is any pressure on the system when you start taking hoses and fittings off. So as you see, I'm resting on the locks. There's no pressure. There's slack in my cables. The lift's safe. Nobody's going to get hurt. So at this point, I'm going to start to remove this cylinder. The block that pulls the cables, that's the first thing we have to remove. Now this being the extra height has the compound pulley block on it, where most of yours out there are just going to have a flat block with studs of the cable sticking through it. Removal is the same on either or. Now, I know it looks simple the way it goes in here, but I actually put a piece of blue tape on the bottom of this, and when I put it back together, I want the blue tape on the bottom because it's possible to put this in upside down. The blue tape on the bottom is to indicate that this is going to be the bottom when it goes back together. It would be possible to put this block on upside down, which would cause a twist in your cables. Okay, so I like to keep everything marked so when it goes back together, it looks okay now, but when it goes back together, you might have a question. So the nut on the end of here, I have an 1/2-inch battery impact gun with an 1.5-inch socket. I'm going to put over the nut. I'm going to hold the rod still because you don't want to put any kind of holding device on this rod that would mar it, because if you mar this rod, the next seal you put in is going to leak worse than the first one. I just hit unwind and I unwound the nut. I'm going to just slide my cable pull block off the end of the shaft, and I'll just let it hang. Because of the retainers, the cables should not jump off the pulleys. So everything should stay intact as long as we put it back together with the blue tape facing the floor. We should be in good shape. Now, we have the cylinder free at this end. Now we have to come down here to the other end. There's a pin that goes through a clevis in the back of the cylinder that goes to a welded stud with a matching hole in it, and that's your pull pin. So we're going to have to remove that. Okay, before we work on getting our pin out of the back of the cylinder, we're going to have to disconnect our hydraulic line, which goes into the side of the cylinder. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break my swivel loose here. Get residual oil out of that. That's why I got the bucket. And I'm going to, I previously broke this loose. Now I can screw this out of the cylinder. Again, residual oil. I have two caps, and a cap and a plug. I'm going to tap the male end, and I'll plug the female end. This will do two things. It'll stop the oil, and it'll keep dirt out of the system. The last thing you want to do is get dirt in your hydraulic system, because that will score your cylinders, get in your check valves, and cause you issues down the road. Okay? Now that's done. To remove this pin, we're going to have to remove one of these sheave assemblies. It looks like the pin's favoring this way, so I'm going to take this one out. And what there's two Allen set screws that hold the pin in. That'll give me a little leverage to break this set screw loose. Now for your information, it's a 5/32 Allen wrench that you'll need to remove these. If you notice, all the tools I'm using on this lift are American. That's because the Backyard Buddy is made right here in the USA. Now, I got both my set screws out. There's not much to pull this pin out, but there's this little thing It's a little plug where your Zerk fitting goes in, and that gives me enough to grab hold of it. Pull that down. I just dropped that other set screw. Okay, we'll set this aside. We got the sheave out of the way, so now it's working back here. There's snap rings on the pin, and it's a little tight, but you can get it. Maybe. Get in there. So close. There's a washer. And then the pin will pull out. Now when this pin comes out, you're going to have the weight of this cylinder on you. So at this point, you want to make sure that you got enough to handle it. If you need help, I would get some help. If you think you can get it, go for it. Pin's out, cylinder's free. It has a brace across here, so it helps support it. Now we got our pin out. Our cylinder's basically just setting here. So I'm going to pull it forward, get it cocked, and try and slip it out underneath here. Because my rod's extended, I hope I have enough room to get it out. I think I'm going to be close. You may want to get someone to help you at this point, but I think I can get it. Okay, there she's coming out. Now we have the cylinder extractor. Now we're going to take it to a workbench and tear it apart and rebuild it by putting new seals in.
Go.
Okay, we got the cylinder out. Morgan was gracious enough not to film me muscling this over here, but I got it here. Got it in a good sturdy vise. If you don't have a good vise mounted to a solid workbench, you may want to figure something else out. There is another option. If you have the tripod plumbing stands that plumbers use to thread pipe, they work real well. We use them out on the road. But while I'm here, I'm going to use the vise we have. Okay, now it's time to rebuild the cylinder. I'm going to remove the plug I put in back here. I'll put a rag over it. Because if Morgan can get a close-up of this, this is your head nut that holds your seal. If you're leaking from this shaft, the seal is inside this head nut. What we have to do is we have to tap it back into the cylinder, and then there's this retaining ring in there we have to remove. Then we're able to work that head nut out. Now, I put the nut back on the end of my threads here because if anything happens and this falls on the ground or bumps it, we don't want to mess up these threads. Because then you have to figure out a way to chase them, get them straightened up so you can put this back together. So it's always good to have a protective cover, and the best thing is the nut that comes with it. Let me go find a punch to knock that back. The reason I took the plug out is because as I tap it back, it's going to want to push oil out the back. So I put a rag over it. I don't have to go far, but that rag will catch a little bit of oil that comes out the back. Before I go further, I may want to mention, if you're rebuilding your cylinder, you most likely have the older style. They used to put a cover plate over this. It's just a flat plate with a hole in the center to go over the shaft with 2 cap screws. And the idea of that plate is it actually holds the head nut out to the end. But over the years, they realized that the pressure inside the cylinder actually is all it needs to hold this out, so they eliminated that. So if you have a round cover plate with 2 cap screws, just remove the cap screws, remove that plate, and you'll have what I have here now. Okay, now I'm going to tap back on my packing nut. I again am using a rag. anything I need to protect the shaft, because there's no reason to nick this or want to nick it, because that will only cause you leaks down the road. Now you can see all the further that went back. You can see how it pushed a little bit of oil out when it went back. So now that that's back, now it's fighting to get that ring out of there. I'm going to put my plug-in back down here just again. Anything to prevent dirt from getting into your system. Okay, Morgan, can you get a picture of this ring? On it. This is the ring. It's like a snap ring, only it doesn't have ears to use pliers on. It's round and it springs still. And I'm going to use a couple small screwdrivers to work it out of there. Looks like I need to tap it back a little bit more. Help me out a little bit. Thought I had it enough, but I need about another 1/8 of an inch. Come on. There it is. And that groove with that piston out against it is what holds everything together. The rod and piston out. What I'm going to do is take a rubber mallet and tap on the end of the rod and try to work the piston. If you can see, the head nut is starting to come out. The reason I have a bucket underneath here, because if you remember, we had this up in the air 3/4 away, so this cylinder between the piston and the head nut is full of oil. So once this outside seal gets passed, we're going to get oil running out of there. I'll probably try to stop exactly when it starts to... Okay, see the oil starting to run? Don't go too crazy, because I don't want to make more of a mess. You can see we're getting the oil coming out of it. There we go. That's why we have a bucket ready. I won't reuse this oil, so you want to make sure you're going to have yourself at least a couple gallons of fresh oil to refill your system. Continue pulling the rod out until the whole rod and piston assembly is in my hands. I just keep sliding this back in, just it keeps everything square inside, because there's some really tight tolerances. there it is. That's your piston seal. The oil that was in there was trapped between your piston and your head nut. So as you put pressure to it, it runs the piston in, which pulls up the lip. Gravity brings it down. What we have left here now is an empty cylinder. This we can remove because we're going to want to put our rod assembly in the vise so we can hold it while we're putting our seals on. What you want to look for is how nice and smooth this is on the inside. Because if this is scored or rusted, it's a good chance it's not going to last very long when you put new seals in. You may want to send it out to get it home. So I'm going to remove this, and then I'll put the rod up in there, and then we'll take a close look at it, because if it's scored, the seals on the end of the piston will show the scores that are inside your cylinder. It'll actually cut the seal to the same pattern that the cylinder scores are. Okay, now we're going to put this in the vise. I don't have a set of brass jaws to fit this, so I'll do one of two things. I'll find cardboard, I'll find anything that will protect this rod to keep from being damaged by the jaws of the vise. What I'm really looking for is just to hold it. I can do my rebuilding at this end. Okay, now, like I said, we can look for scores in the piston and in the seals. If you see any scores, most likely your cylinder needs honed. This one looks pretty nice. I don't see any indication of an issue. Okay, the next step, we're going to remove our piston. There's a big nut on the end, which just happens to be the same size socket as the nut on the other end that holds the pull block on. Now remove that nut. Now, the piston should come off. You'll see there's a seal that seals the inside of the piston. Now, you might ask why I took this off. Because I want to pull this off. Now you might ask why I don't just pull it off the other end. If you look closely, there's a taper. That taper is needed to be able to start this back on without messing up your seals. If you try and force it in on this end, there is no taper. See, I can't get it on. It's like running into a wall. Yeah, you can grind this and put a taper on it. You're going to take away a little of the effective surface there. Is our head nut, because that's going to go on first. Then we can put our piston on and actually rebuild it while it's on the rod. So to remove the old seals, you're going to need yourself a probe or a pick or some sharp instrument that will be able to dig into the seal and pull them out of the groove and allow access for the new seal. Now I'm going to make a suggestion here. Again, like you don't want to scratch your rod, you don't want to scratch this either. Because if your probe scratches this aluminum, that's another place your seal can fail. So I'm very particular about making sure I push the probe just into the seal. Okay, on the outside of your head nut, we have an O-ring and a backup washer. Now, rarely do these ever go bad because it's what we call a static seal. Nothing moves through it, not like the rod moving through your rod seal. once these are in and seat, there's no wear or tear involved with them. But they come in the kit, so we're going to replace them anyway. They may have got damaged as you were coming out. Here's your new backup washer. The colors might be different, but colors are immaterial. It does not matter what color. It's all about the size. So there's the backup ring. And there's the new O-ring. Those replace these two parts. Now these two parts are the very important parts. These are the parts that seal the rod. Now we're going to go back over to the rod. Because there's a specific way you have to put this together. Your rod goes on, or piston goes on the rod like this. Okay, because here's where that snap ring set in. So you don't want to get that backwards. So your seal, this is the main rod seal. If you're leaking out around the shaft, most likely this is the seal that has gone bad. If you'll see, it's flat on one side and V-shaped on the other side. The V-shape has to face the pressure, because once this is inside here, as the pressure is trying to go through there, it actually expands the seal, both the inner and outer lip, and makes a tighter fit. And that helps it not leak. So the reason I bring all that up is it's specific how this goes in. Now there's a special tool we have for putting these in, but most likely you're not going to have that. So I'm going to try to do it here just with my hands to show you that it can be done. You have to fight with a little bit, but you can get it in. Let me flip the wiper down. Now I pushed it through and I got it started in the groove. Now I'm going to try and push it back up in. What you don't want to do is put screwdrivers, probes, or anything in there that's going to nick the seal. So it's a little bit hard on the fingers, but that's the best way to keep from damaging the new seal. Okay, one burst. It got in. And the way you can tell it's a proper fit is because there's nothing humped out. It's smooth all the way around. It's even. I don't know if Morgan can get in there, but you can see the opening where the pressure, the V opening, and that's where the pressure is forced in there and helps open it. Okay? Now the next one is a lot easier to put in. This is just a wiper. This will go in, and again, this has a specific way to go. You'll see the lip that sticks up. If I hold it still, maybe you can get a good picture of it. Got it? Okay. That goes with the lip up. And what that does is if dirt gets on the rod, it wipes it off before it gets to the seal to keep the seal from going bad because of dirt. So it's literally called a wiper. So there we have a rebuilt head nut. And because we went off from this end, we have a nice taper. So I'm going to go get a little grease, because I like to grease all the rubber parts. Give them a little bit of lubrication until they get oil around them when it's back in operation. So if you can hang on a minute, I'll go get. I got a little dab of regular wheel bearing grease. No particular brand. The seals are resistant to grease. It's not going to hurt them. But again, it's just, let's call it brake and lube for a better word for it. Now we got our taper there. Slips on. Even though it's a new seal, it pops right on. I know that seal is on good and will not leak. There's no damage. You can look around here. There's no pieces of rubber that got cut, sticking anywhere. So we're in good shape. Okay, the kit doesn't have a new O-ring for in here, but again, it's a static seal. So it will never have any reason to fail. So I just put a little grease on it. I'll put my piston back on. I'm going to put my nut back on, because now that it's on this, it'll be easier to change this seal out instead of holding my hand and taking a chance of sticking the probe into my hand. That's no fun at all. Okay, let me get my... Here's the nut that we took off that hold the piston on. Again, head nut, piston. Inch-and-a-half socket. Now this is a two-piece seal. The orange part actually does the sealing, but there's a black piece underneath that works like an expander. Okay, I'll take that off. And now I'll take the expander out. Again, not putting the point of the probe into the aluminum because we don't want any scratches in there. If for some reason you scratch it, just try and sand it out best. Connected with a little tie. This one just happens to be the same color. I'll make sure that stays free. I don't mix it up with the other one. Now, what's important is that the black seal, we don't want it to roll when we put it in there. I watch it real close, then I usually put my probe around. Because if it rolls, it'll change the size of it, and it may not. Yep. Okay, now that we got our under seal, our tension seal on, now we'll put our colored seal on. It's usually pink or blue, and it actually does the sealing. They stretch a little bit on. They do go, but you just got to stretch them a little bit. But what you don't want to do is overstretch them. Just stretch them enough to get them on. There, popped on. That one went on nice. Now it's nice and tight. If you do overstretch it, give it time. It will return to its original shape and get tight. Okay, here we are. We have everything rebuilt. So we're going to remove the rod from the vise. Again, we had protection in there. So if you look at the rod, no marks, no reason for the seal to go bad. Set this down so I can put the cylinder up. And I'm going to put a rag on this because, again, we don't want any dirt. Chassis grease. To help prevent any drag or catching on the way in. I like the grease where this feed line goes in. They taper it in there and round it, make it soft so it doesn't catch the seal, but I like to make sure there's a good amount of grease around it. Because you can't see if anything happens once it's in there. You're just going to have to sense by feel if anything has happened. Okay, let's start. Make it easier to push it in. I'm going to take the plug out. So air can go in there. And keep things even. I'm going to slip my head nut in there. Now I should be able to push it in and go in nice and smooth. Everything's lined up. Air's coming out. Okay, I don't want to push it in much further than I had it out to begin with because it's going to have to come out to go back onto my block. So I'm going to try and keep it close to the same distance. Get my punch. head nut back in. Goes back in a lot easier than it comes out. Let it make a liar out of me. Nope. Thank you, ring. And you want to pull out on it so that the ring there. So it'll pop into place. Now at this point, if you have one of the older style ones, that round plate would go over here, and your screws that hold that cover plate on would actually tighten it, and that would help pull the head nut into position. Again, the later model ones, they've eliminated that plate because the pressure holds it in position. Okay, now it's a matter of putting it back up again. Because my rod was a little shorter on this one, it should work its way in easier. Here we go. Now we'll go back here. It's set in position. I can get my pin. It goes in the back. Now it's got to go in the same way. The way we took the pulley out. Okay, she stopped filming while I worked out that pin in. It took a little bit, but I figured it out. So now we're going to put our washer and the snap ring on. I have to make sure the snap ring's all the way on. Sometimes they give you, there it is. Let it click now, and there she's on. You gotta remember, on this side, our spacer is on the top. That means the cable goes underneath this one. So now on this side, our spacer has to be on the bottom to hold the cable above this one. So you don't want to assume they look the same. They will be different, and that's to keep the cables from rubbing against each other. This is your cable retainer. Now your pin, this is where a grease fitting goes to grease it. We remove them during operation because it gets broken off when it goes all the way down. But that should be removed every so often, at least once a year. Put a grease fitting in there and grease. And what it is, these two pulls here lubricate your sheath. I guess I don't want to do that yet. I need to put the, let's redo that. Hold on. This is our cable retainer. And this is the spacer. The spacer will go on the bottom. And our sheath will go on top. This rod was out further, so in order for us to reach our pull block, we need to manually pull it out. We want to do this before we get oil in it or hook up our hose. Because we're going to have a little bit of resistance because everything's new. And it'll come. I like to put a rag around it. It's easier to pull in a rag than pull in that smooth shaft. A little bit further. Okay. That should be worn enough. So while I'm here, I'm going to take our nut off now and put our pull block back on. Remember how we put tape on the bottom? And when we put it back up, we want the tape to be on the bottom. Looks like it's going to go up. We got our pull bar up. We got our blue tape facing the floor, so we know we're going back on the exact same way we came off. Use my 1.5 inch socket. Tighten it. Now the last thing we have to do is hook up our hydraulics. Okay, because we're working with pipe thread, we want to have to put some kind of a sealer on our fittings. Now the trick with Teflon tape is you got to put it on right. If you don't put it on right, you're going to get Teflon tape in your system. Again, that's dirt and it'll mess up the system. So the proper way to put on Teflon tape is to wrap it clockwise so that when you screw it in, it doesn't come unwrapped, but stay off the first thread. Because if the first thread doesn't have any tape on it, then no tape can get in. The other option would be to use some kind of a pipe dope, which is a liquid-based dope, which will dissolve if it gets in your oil and won't affect it. Myself, I feel Teflon tape does a better job. You just have to put it on properly. Tighten the velocity fuse. That's what this shiny silver fitting is. It's about 2.5 inches long. It's a safety device. Once that's tight, get my hose. It's important that you don't have kinks or twists in your hose. Relaxed. Because under pressure, a hose with a twist in it actually has a tendency to wear out 70% faster than a hose without a twist. Easy to keep the twist out, easy to make your hose last longer. So I can run it. This tank's plenty big, so there's plenty of oil in here to feed it. But what's nice is the fact that it's a self-bleeding cylinder. You don't have to worry about bleeding anything. Just run it. Now, of course, it's not going to move for a while because it's filling up the cylinder. All that oil that we dumped out is now being replaced. Okay, now at this point we have our lift moving, so let's just, while it's still up in the air, search for any possible leaks we may have not got complete. Right here where we put the Teflon tape on and our velocity fuse back in, I don't see any leaking. Here where our swivel goes to our hose, we look good there. Our vent back here, nothing. And up here at the shaft seal, everything looks good. So at this point, we're going to let it go down, get the air out of it, run it back up and down a few times. Again, it's self-bleeding, and you're done. Your cylinder's rebuilt.